You please. Where is it?
On the game. I already started. New game.
Let's run this up.
Acider.exe.
Ooh, we have the AMP crib. Alright, what do we see here?
Hey, Kai! Something's wrong with the agent. He seems to have lost some of his things, and it's made him go insane.
There's fucking stuff at the top. I guess
Top right. That's too big. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay.
Can you check in on him?
Something wrong with agent. Let's check up on.
Investigate the air.
Investigate the area. Let's see the whipskis, yo. This guy tastes fat. This am I supposed to be Kai? The restaurant.
Shit. So what's it say on the garage door though? Oh shit.
QE.
Oh.
Let's see. Other way. Control is sneak. Got you.
Open the door. Oh, the kitty. White dot means you can interact with it. Control's too sensitive.
Locked. Locked.
What the fuck is whispering, bro?
What the fuck? It's pretty tight stuff. Hey, what up, stream? Ain't nobody. This thing is tired. Is that what? No lighter equipment.
How lighter? You don't have a flashlight?
I need food. Oh, bro, there's a shit I need to get. Hey, ballcourt.
Basketball? Oh, put some shots in. Oh, you can click on it. Right click.
What is that in the hoop?
Is that Kai Cenat?
Yeah. Okay. 2. Oh, that's bad. Did I miss? Oh.
I don't think you hit it.
Bro. Give me that. Yo. Oh my god. Hoop dreams. What if I just spend the whole
game just doing this?
Yeah, and whole night.
Are you not at full health though? That's the crazy. How they doing this?
Oh my god.
Yeah, just practice, bro. I think
this is the most important thing.
I think that's all you can do.
Ah! So you gotta be quiet. What's the hat?
Where'd you get a hat from? Oh, Agent is growing stronger. Agent's hat. Oh shit. Oh, there's a hat bar at the bottom right.
Oh shit, that was low-key scary. Let's keep it pushing. Why is this low-key got me tense, bro?
This site was blocked.
Fuck, bro.
Yeah, just gonna put some more shots up, bro.
Think so? This guy just wants you to hoop all night. Let's get this layup. Oh my god. Oh, okay, hold on. Oh, I can jump.
Locked.
Oh.
Locked.
For now. Why does it say for now, bro? What's H? Why does it say H on the...
Food.
Oh, food bar.
Yeah. Bro, I feel like I've tried everything. Try this way?
Locked.
Okay, no, I think it has to be this way because they wanted me to go shoot the basketball.
Yeah, you found the hat. So you must have to go this way.
Yeah, that's it. Whoa. We try this door?
What the hell was that noise? Did you go downstairs and shit?
Did you hear this? Did you hear that?
That's not you?
That wasn't me.
Oh, the door up there. Well, you know you can't shoot.
Shut the fuck up, bro. Oh my god.
It's dark as hell, man.
I'm actually so lost.
I need to watch a tutorial.
Nah, not yet. Not yet. I'm not tuning. Let's go back to the front. Maybe it's the front. What the fuck is that noise? Is it supposed to be this dark?
You want to turn the brightness up, bro?
Nah, this is scary. Okay. Unlock the house. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you need to find a key, bro.
Locked.
Check the whips.
Oh yeah, I wonder if I can open the whips.
Check the guardhouse or something. No?
This shit's not attractable. Bro, are we gonna have to look for a tutorial? It's kind of embarrassing. Wait, you have any ideas?
Have the right item for
No
that?
lighter.
Okay, so yeah, we definitely need to find some shit.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yo? Okay, wait, maybe there's shit on here. Bro, look at me.
Okay.
There's two.
Okay, go burn the bush. You can do that, bro. Is that lighter unlimited, bro? I'm just asking. I don't know.
It's not the lighter.
It's not the lighter?
The lighter isn't what you need.
Oh, okay, so what do we need the lighter?
I'm not found the lighter though. Maybe I need the flashlight to see what's going on inside the crib.
We can find the key through the
Lighter, key.
flashlight in the light. What is that?
Yes.
The yellow key added to the inventory. Okay. Yellow key. That door's blocked, bro.
No. This is Kai's room. Just want to see what's in there. Yo, oh god, the key broke, bro.
The key broke.
How much
are you
Oh
eating?
my god,
you fucking
I
fat ass.
fucked up. I
Oh
ate.
my god, you ate everything, bro.
No way, donuts. I can't take them. Oh, give me. I got blue key.
Okay.
Bro, I ate so much food, I fucked up so bad.
What's that purple shit on the shit? X or 1?
Okay, remember the repeller. I think that's.
Is that how you fight him?
I guess. Serial.
Remember, you can jump, bro.
Wait. How do we use it? How do we use it? How do
You
we
got
use
your flashlight.
it? Is that X or what?
Mash A, you escape, bro. You're dying, you're losing health, bro.
What the fuck? It's X.
Yo, hide, bro. Probably crouch or something. Oh my god, where you are? Yeah, that's crazy.
What the fuck was that?
These look like they're missing something.
You too flat. You gotta do some parkour now.
Oh fuck.
Okay. Alright. Yeah, you eat some food, bro.
I don't have any food left.
You have 2, bro. It says 2.
I don't eat food. He's behind me. Shh. No, bro.
Agent,
I'm dead.
get off!
That's scary, bro. That's actually scary. Bro,
You got your ass.
I got my ass ate. Alright, you run there, you try. That shit actually got me, bro. This guy's on my case, bro. Fuck. Why does my chest hurt?
A heart attack, bro?
Fam.
When did they let me out of this, bro? You gotta restart the whole game, bro?
I
Fuck.
think so. I don't think they're sick like that.
You don't got a replay button?
They don't got that shit.
Damn, bro. Alright. Let me try to not get my ass eaten.
Hey, Kai! Something's wrong with the agent. He seems to have lost some of his things, and it's made him go insane. Can you check in on him?
Okay. Hopefully everything's in the same spot.
Yeah, flashlight, food, batteries. What the fuck? You didn't grab everything.
What else I missed? Oh, I missed the food.
Burger, yeah. I'll do one more later. Oh, that's a chocolate. Right, so much food. You have to score a bucket.
What is that in the hoop?
What the fuck is this shit about? What's percent on, bro? Right click?
Yeah, you got it. Splash. Nah. Westbrook.
Hey,
That man name is Westbrook. Oh my god.
Jesus
bro.
Christ, bro.
Hit that shit.
Oh my
Go
god.
for the switch. Go for the switch. Backboard is bullshit. Backboard's behind you.
What if I fucking just shoot up, bro? Okay.
Oh, did you try to go? Why don't you go like through the hoop? Like,
Mmm.
nah.
That shit did not let me, bro.
Has to be from the top.
From the top.
It's not. It's a.
Oh,
It's a
can I
lot,
bounce-
bro.
Can I
It's a
bounce
lot.
off the light, bro?
You have to splash it. Yeah, maybe.
Alright.
Aim for the rim. Aim for the rim. Like literally aim for the rim. That's it.
That's
Like
way
a
too
little
low.
higher, a
That's
little
way
higher.
too low.
A little higher. Okay, way higher.
Still way
Aim for the light. Aim for the light.
Aim for the light. That's way too high, bro.
Nah, do it. Ah, see the light. The light's a move. Oh my god, you've missed so many times.
Fuck, man.
Oh my god, bro.
Alright. Yeah, it's definitely easier from here for sure, bro. Fuck.
Come on.
Ain't
Ah.
no fucking way, bro.
Ah.
Alright.
It's gonna be one of these ones. Free throw.
Oh.
Fuck
Alright,
me, bro.
no, that's okay. Let me search the line.
Bro.
It's okay. That was a practice shot.
Can take. What
That's a practice shot.
Oh, nice rebound.
Practice
Oh my god.
shot. Nah. At this rate, bro.
Yeah, you're
We're
counting me,
gonna
bro.
be here forever, bro.
I did that shit so quick.
Bro, I didn't even know this was an objective, bro.
Cause how you have to
Alright.
get the high.
Am I actually like tweaking?
Nah, you're aiming too high, man. Back up. You go to the 3.9. And right there, splash. Okay, wait, a little bit higher. Back to the 3.9 and aim a little bit higher. Wow.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, that was 3 times. That was 3 times. Oh, wait. Is this the dagger? Is this the dagger?
Nah, bro. This is crazy. Yo, maybe I should do a jump shot.
I think we should watch a tutorial, bro.
Yeah, let me practice my jumper, bro.
We need to watch a tutorial, fam.
Practice my jumper, bro. Oh, almost hit the fadeaway. Bam.
Tips to improve your shooting. Hand placement on the ball. You don't want your glide-handed ball right at the very end of your release. You want it to come off.
It's Patty Mills. Patty Mills. You got it, minute.
Alright. I feel it.
Oh, maybe we need to watch more.
Use these 4 shooting drills to fix your shot, especially if you shoot like this. Number 1, if you're lacking fluidity in your shot, give ball raises a try. Bring the ball up to your set point, back down, and then follow through with a form shot. Number 2, if you have flat arc on your shot.
No jump. And follow through.
Okay, hold on.
One more. Up, down. Yeah, pump fake, let you.
Oh, I gotta stop jumping. Hold on.
Yeah. Oh. Can I see that
You
song?
can go behind the backboard and do over the backboard
Nah,
shoot. Number 3, if your follow through is
that.
crooked like this, you can go side of the backboard shooting. This is
That's ridiculous, bro. No, go back to the. Honestly, go to the. Yeah, I think you shoot from here. Bro, that was crazy.
Press the wrong button.
I swear that one, man.
Okay, aim a little higher than that. That's gotta be it.
This is crazy.
This is insane. No.
Oh, wow. This is.
Am I just ass? Nah, like genuinely.
I got the song for you.
Genuinely, am I just ass?
Let's go. Fucking congratulations.
Yo, the key was there the whole time, bro.
Oh, straight flashlight. I think he's out there. Nah. Okay, answer.
I think I gotta get the repellent first before he attacks me. These fucking footsteps, man. Where's the repellent?
Okay, it's gonna be to your left.
Come on, left.
Yeah, the purple shirt there.
Oh, purple shit.
But there's a blue key over here too. Behind you, there's a blue key behind you. Do you hear him? Oh, did you see that? I swear I see him. I swear I see him. There is a blue key behind you. Counter to your left.
Where the fuck is he, bro?
It was like, oh, like down the hallway. Yeah, the door's just open. One more. Is that you or him?
That's me.
Okay. The key is all the way. Oh, okay. Fuck. Honestly, do what you need to do, bro. Fuck.
I don't know what I need to do, bro.
You just gotta keep exploring, bro.
Where the fuck is the blue shit, bro? Where's the key?
The blue key is on the other side, bro. You all the way down there.
Huh?
Yeah, fam. You literally like turned around.
Oh, I need to go that way?
Yeah.
Fuck. The fuck was that?
What the fuck are you doing?
The fuck was that?
It should be right. It should be right there. Right there. It should be like stand up. It should be right by the cereal. Oh, maybe to the left. Should be around here somewhere. Chocolate. That's not blue key. Where's the blue key? The key's here somewhere, bro. I remember picking it up here.
You're gonna be tweaking, bro.
Turn the flash on.
You're gonna be tweaking, bro.
Oh, wait, sorry. Yeah. Yes. Adios, man.
Let's go upstairs. Just gonna go upstairs.
Is that you or him? That's you, right?
That's me.
These look like they're missing something.
What looks like they're missing something?
Wait, there's writing over there. There's writing over. Oh,
Missing something? I gotta pick this up?
Shouldn't this go in a stand or something?
Oh, you gotta be tweaking me, bro. There's three.
oh, there's one up there, yeah. Alright, maybe you just put all of them like down there.
I don't even know if that's the right spot. I
Oh,
think
no, just so like have them next to each other, so you know. Oh, be careful, bro.
Brother.
Okay, we got two. Are these the stands here? Maybe.
Oh, there's more than three? Oh, fuck, there's more than three. There's six.
Oh my god.
Yeah, does this game have like a save option, bro?
Nah.
Bruh.
Finish it. One life, bro. Bro, a door
One
open.
life, one wife.
Door open, cuz.
Yeah? But what do you want me to do about all that, bro?
Careful, careful. Where is it?
There's one more. There's another one. Okay.
It's ancient.
Fuck you mean it's agent?
Flashlight?
I don't want to see him.
What the fuck? Yo, put the flash on it. Okay, never mind. What's going on? Why is there so many doors opening and closing? Fuck, dropping it, bro. Butterfingers, ass.
Bro, it did it by itself, bro.
I just whisper it, fam. Did you see where the other one was?
There's one right there.
Yeah, this one. Where's the, and the last one's
right
there.
there. How the fuck do I get over there, bro?
They have to go around the long way, bro.
Huh?
Like other side. Like.
No?
Oh, careful, bro.
Alright, let me just get the safe one. Can't make that jump? Can't make that jump? Okay, guess I have to touch it. Alright.
Bro. Behind you? Okay.
Are you tweaking, bro?
I'm tweaking. Okay, no.
Oh, now I can make the jump, you fucker.
Go back. I'm thinking, you know where the door was? Maybe you go around that way. Like, if you jump on these. I'm tweaking? You get up there.
Guys gonna have hops.
Maybe you can reach if you go to the end.
See, here's the thing. Here's what I think I need to do, bro.
Oh.
I think I need to jump and grab it.
Oh. Maybe you should have that door open, man.
So I don't know how the fuck to get back here that quickly.
If you want
We don't know where the blue key opens, right?
Nah. So you want to go back inside, open the door, try to get outside before you do that shit, then?
Yeah. How the fuck does this repellent work, dog?
This. Outstanding.
You really won't let me jump on this, bro?
Nah. Yeah. Don't miss.
Shit.
Don't miss.
Make sure he's not around, you know?
Last I seen, he was right underneath you. No pressure, though. What the fuck was that?
Why did it happen as soon as I was about to jump?
Fucking freaky ass game, bro. Bottoms up, bottoms up.
Oh, I made the jump and I fell off. Fuck.
What do you do now? This is where I died. Okay, you just re-enter through the left, I assume. That door right there.
Yeah.
You're good. You're good. Bro, that brother back asleep, bro. That brother is asleep, bro.
Okay, so I can make that jump.
Yeah,
So
easy.
I shouldn't stress, right?
Yeah, you shouldn't panic last time for no reason.
Yeah, you know how it goes. I'm gonna just jump off the edge, right?
Yeah, I don't think you even. Yeah, calm.
Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. Go for that. Okay. Like work no reaction.
Yo, this guy's sick. Look at this guy.
See, here's the thing. What is this? What's this? I'm tweaking. I panicked.
Okay, that's 2 agent hats. You have to collect all the hats.
How many hats are there? There's 10 hats.
Got 2. Oh my god, this is gonna. Oh yeah, we're gonna be doing this all night. We're not even gonna get to schedule 1.
Schedule 1 fucking the boulder game, bro. Oh shit. That was the window he opened the door, right?
I don't even think he's in there no more. So what's next? I think you just keep exploring. What is that? Oh, it's nothing. It's nothing.
I mean, it could be something.
Yes.
It's Agent!
Where?
Flashlight? Why is he walking like that, bro?
It's on something.
This guy's tweaking, bro.
House is massive, bro.
It's Asian. What is that?
The cheeseburger.
Yeah. Partially eaten cheeseburger. You need that. You need that.
Huh? What the fuck? pick it up.
Fuck you, agent.
Oh shit. What button is it?
F, it's F. You got him, nice shit.
Get the fuck off me, bro.
You need more repellent, bro. That nigga ran, bro.
What is this? Another key? Oh,
Yellow key. I thought we broke. Oh, is that red key beside the cups? The cups. Yeah.
We gotta be more observant, bro. These keys are hiding in plain sight.
Didn't say. Oh, okay. Crowbar. Okay, I think you enter.
Why did this become a completely different game for a second?
Bro.
What?
Bro.
What's up?
He's coming. How do you use the crowbar? Yo, your flashlight almost on.
I have 2 more batteries, though, don't
I don't even know,
I? Of course it says no. You fucking
bro.
yellow
Yellow
keys
keys,
are there.
yeah, bro.
Oh, the other one broke, didn't it?
Yeah. How do you get up, bro? It has to be exit.
I
Bro.
know
How do you
there
get
was a
up there,
dead end,
bro?
bro.
Fireworks.
That's not energy drinks, bro.
Oh, maybe I'm bugging.
There must be something else in here, right? Battery. Oh, that's good. Unfortunately.
In my life. 7 more. You're flying, bro.
Oh, there's a door here.
Back out. Okay.
Okay, right at the front, right at the front.
It's calm.
The
Oh,
house.
whoa, it's behind you, it's behind you.
Huh?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this car wasn't here before, was it?
No,
That
it
is my car.
was. Yeah, maybe you can use the crowbar to flatten the tin. How do you flatten it? Flatten. Tin.
We need an axe or some shit, bro.
You gotta react. It's the best, it's the best. That shit was freaking me out too, don't worry. Alright, we enter the crib, bro.
Dude, what's this crowbar for?
Maybe it'll become useful later on.
I'm out of repellent. I need more repellent. Fuck.
Go down that hallway, bro.
Fuck.
It's behind the like a sofa. There's hella shit there.
Can I jump over this couch? Oh, fuck you guys in that. Oh, repellent. Let's go.
Oh, we're probably like he's on bug, bro. It's fucking crazy. Headphones. What are those? Camera? Battery. Upstairs or downstairs?
What the fuck was that? Oh, hell no.
Wait, battery repellent, nice. There gotta be a hat somewhere here. So, battery? Chocolate. Why the fuck is there chocolate beside it? You said, yo, that's shit, bro.
Nah, this place is actually a fucking maze, bro.
You
Stocking
gotta get time to do this.
Stocking up on.
Uh-oh.
What the fuck is that, bro?
Bro, where's these hats, bro? Okay. Oh, this is...
It's a lunar dungeon, bro. Cuck chairs. Oh my god.
The neon classic.
The fuck is the lighter for, bro? Oh, what? Oh, it's another one. Oh, starts tweaking, bro. Don't make me do this shit again, bro.
Yo, grab the burger. Where are these? Yo, wait, top left? What's that?
Oh no.
Shit is so... That should be fucking me up.
Oh, the door actually opened, bro? Fuck. Oh, it was dead end anyways.
This shit fucks me up every
so
time. Nah, there's a hat in here, bro. There's no reason to make you open this.
What?
That's it?
Are you dead ass right now?
There's nothing in here. Oh, right here.
Oh, what the? So just a burger and a battery, huh?
Yo, look down. To your right. Ah, nothing. Alright, that's it. Oh, did you look through that?
More batteries.
Nothing else. Couple kicks.
Fuck.
You sweating?
Bro, I've been sweating.
It's to your right.
Oh my god. What button is it?
It's F. I'm sure it's F.
No, F is the flashlight.
Oh no,
Oh,
X,
I have it
X,
out, I have it
X,
out. Okay,
X.
hold
It's
on.
X. It's
Ooh.
X.
I can just leave it out? I'll just leave it out.
Yeah, fuck that pussy. Alright, go down this way. Yellow key, blue key.
There's a blue key.
Oh no, never mind. It's chocolate.
Oh, fuck.
Oh, you wasted it. Wait, you think you can combine the repellent with the lighter to make a fire? You know, like, you've never done that before?
Okay, well, I'm not gonna waste one to figure it out.
Fair enough.
Okay, it's X. X, and then I have to click. Can't open any of that shit. Did I go up this way? Upstairs or downstairs?
Wait, you been through that already?
Isn't this where I came from?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I guess there's probably another door on this side.
What are you talking about?
I have to have... This shit actually does not... Yo, chill, bro. What the fuck?
Yo, put the light up, put the light up! Chase it, bro. Chase it, bro. Get his ass. Get his ass. He's running. He's scared, bro. He's scared.
Oh, fuck. Man.
You wasted
Oh, no.
two?
Okay, I should probably stop chasing
Yeah,
it.
you should. I only have one left, bro.
It's okay. I can eat enough to live. Is there anything else outside?
Did we ever find the hat? Key.
Key. How many fucking keys are there?
Get away from me!
Huh?
To get away from me is crazy.
Who are you talking to? Oh my god!
What is this dude doing in that corner, bro?
Get away from me, agent!
That is fucking weirdo, bro. What's he doing over there? Get away from me, agent!
Leave me alone!
Leave me alone.
Drunk as fuck. Bitch, you dumb as
How
fuck.
did I just pick up a battery?
I don't know. Oh my god. Dead end. Wait,
Get away from me!
go to the left? Yeah, I thought I saw something. Can't eat the donuts. You still in that corner? What is it? We see you, my
Is
boy.
there anything in this corner? Oh, what's that on the ground? The hedge trimmers, bro.
Kill him.
Get away from me!
This is my last repellent, though.
I think it's worth it for the hedge trimmers.
Where's he gonna go, though? Is he gonna come at me? Well, I lost that.
Wait, use the hedge trimmers on the thing.
Okay, bye. We're still gonna find like.
Ooh, I was here already! Whoa, 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 whoa.
I can't. I'm out of sprint.
Oh my
I'm
god!
out of sprint.
Oh my god! Oh my god! You have a repellent! Okay. That hat? Battery's nice.
Fuck the batteries. I want a hat.
Fuck that. I'm like Luka with LeBron not on the Lakers. I'm gonna connect with the AR-15. Oh, where do you go? He's everywhere,
Are you gonna
bro.
go to that door? Maybe. Bro, get the fuck away from
Yeah,
me.
that's right. Nah, he's it's up still.
Did I break too many repellents at once?
I think so. Now we're having too much fun.
We were chasing him, bro.
Yeah, me the hunted.
Where the fuck did he just come from? Bro!
Go upstairs. You know where to go. Yeah, that way. Get upstairs, bro.
I'm trying my fucking best, bro.
He can't get you. He not be like, oh, can't get you. Come on, bro.
I swear to God, if he turns that fucking corner right now. Oh my God. Okay.
What did he say?
So you can't escape me. No way, there's fucking 6 more hats left, bro.
Bro, how committed are you? Oh, he's right there.
The cheeseburger.
Cheeseburger.
This guy actually, like, you know, walking through walls or something, bro. How is he so fast? How do I hear him, but I don't see him, bro?
I think there's more shit. You have to go down. There's upstairs and downstairs. You have to go right there.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's, like, right here.
Game plan. Go the other way.
That way? Right
Know where you came from.
Bro, where the fuck is this guy? Oh?
Alright, run downstairs, bro. Okay.
Oh my God.
Was that a rat?
upstairs?
What's the chicken? What's the chicken? What's the chicken?
Where the fuck is a hat,
There has
bro?
to be a hat here
There
somewhere.
has to be a hat. PS5, but no fucking hat. Are you serious?
Okay, there's probably one in the room itself.
There's nothing in this room.
No. This is the closet, bro. Oh, if he was right there, I would have freaked the fuck out. There's gonna be something in this room. I refuse to key. Okay.
This is pure panic, bro.
So, bro, so fat ass is up here, bro.
There's no fucking
There's a
hat.
door. There's a door to your left.
There's no hat.
Maybe in here. There's another door there. Wait.
Yeah, hold on, let me check the balcony real quick, bro. Okay, this just goes all the way around.
What's that?
Nice.
What is that? Is it a speaker?
What the fuck am I supposed to do with this, bro? Where the fuck do I need to take this shit now?
Fuck, bro, I don't know. This is actually a serious game. Is it sauna?
It's a serious game of okay. What the hell?
Bro, you should okay, you're gonna go back. What the fuck? What is it?
I could plug this in if any of the outlets.
Wait, what?
It's Asian.
I could tank him. Fuck you, bitch. Fuck you, bitch.
Oh,
Oh, I got repellent?
they picked up repellent.
Should I just spray him? Is he gonna run away?
He's just chilling. Well, I think he's cool, bro.
It's Agent!
It's Asian. What's that attached to? TV? We friends though. 0792. 0792. 0792.
Bro, there's no hat in this room?
0792, bro.
Yeah, where is that? Is that for the door down there? Is this for something, some code? Was there a red puzzle? Oh shit.
Fuck you, agent. Locked.
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 Alright.
I got red keys yet. I only have blue and yellow keys. Yeah, there was a door you skipped, remember?
Yeah. This one.
Oh, wow. I'll be wasting people's time still.
Did it open this door?
That was where you entered.
Oh, okay, so that's...
Basement? Yeah, I don't know where these hats are, bro.
Locked.
How is it locked? It was open before.
He opened it, that's why.
You fucker.
Need red keys, bro. Why is it turning on? Why is it going crazy? Bro, this is just unnecessary, bro.
Dog, where the fuck am I supposed to put a 4-digit key in? Oh. Nope, that's the key card. What the fuck?
4792, right?
It needs a key card, not a code, bro.
Oh, I don't even remember the code if we need the code.
It's like 0792 or something, bro. Fuck.
0792.
Can we check this door?
No, we didn't. Close it?
A battery.
It's. Okay, to be fair, this was like an early door. We've now gone through here. Look up? Have we been looking up enough? Sometimes I feel like that should be in high places. Fuck it, yo, just go to the next room, bro.
Which next room,
The
bro?
one behind you.
This one? Did we already go here?
No, I don't think so.
This ain't in the garage?
Oh, that's the garage.
We got a hat here, right? Yeah, we got a hat in this red door. Man. Alright.
Oh, nothing's up there. You've been up there like 10 million times. I think it has to be the other side, bro.
Should we go through that crawl space?
Sure.
Did we find a hat in here?
We never did. Oh.
Okay, so we can't even open that door. Did I miss something here?
Behind the table?
This table?
Bro, I don't know.
Damn.
Wait, go back?
2?
The block, the other block there? Can you move those fucking things with the crowbar maybe?
Oh, the crowbar.
We've been here. Well, okay, no, what's that shit on the ground? Oh, you can't. Is it?
It's
Oh,
it's
a
a path.
chair.
It's the fucking
I'm
path.
dumb.
Oh no, we got one on the Christmas tree, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, okay.
Wait, but okay, I feel like, wait. Check? Go around.
Around what?
Go outside. To the right, look at the wall. We got the food from there.
New door.
Ass. Stop. Now the motherfucking hammer time. Whoa. You get boomerang.
Really? There's nothing in here. You're tweaking me. There's
Today.
How many fucking plaques are there, bro?
You know, get some dick today. But no. Oh, you got a red key finally. So you can enter the big basement. Ass. Stop. If I don't get my hats back. Oh,
Where the fuck am I?
this is his room. Yeah, no shoes, bro. Up. It's a nice shower though. It's gonna be assy, man. Oh my god. Somebody point me to the best ass eater. Ass, stop. Motherfucking hammer.
Why is there a burrito in the fucking toilet, bro?
Yeah, you talking like you know about to eat that shit.
Have I been in this room?
Let me go motherfucking hammer time. No. You haven't. Oh, you stupid.
What the fuck? What the hell was that? What the hell was
Ass
that?
is colossal. Ass. Alright. Red key, bro. Red key. You've been here, though. There's no way we wasted red key on that shit. No way the key was wasted on that, bro. We should use that for the basement, bro.
Bro, I didn't know it was gonna fucking break.
Get that. Go, just run to the basement, bro. Run to the basement.
I think they heard you, bro.
Lock.
Fuck, bro. I think I just sold, bro.
Shit.
What's that? Is something? Oh, it's a reflection, bro. Fuck. Oh my god. Where the hell's another red key at, bro?
We have to stay on this side. I think it's. I don't even know. Chocolate.
Where the fuck am I gonna get another red key, bro?
Maybe the
How many repellents do I have left?
I don't know, bro. I think we gotta stay on that side of the fucking house, though. I really don't think there's anything
You
wrong
think
with
there's
it.
anything else upstairs though?
Maybe. I feel like we might have missed something upstairs.
Get away from me, agent!
Where the fuck are you, dude? Oh, what?
Yes.
Man.
Maybe the lighter, bro. Maybe we gotta do something with the lighter, bro. Like, look for maybe candles or some shit. Or fireworks. Like, these niggas do some wild shit with fireworks, though.
Down?
Wait. On top of that? Dots.
So we need to be checking on top more, bro?
I think so.
Oh.
Wait, was there something in there? Or you can't even enter in there, can you?
I can't even open this.
Okay, that was just glare then. What's that? Wait, in the middle? It's coming. That is crazy.
What were you talking about?
That is crazy.
What
That
were you talking
nigga,
about? No. What the hell?
this nigga
Is that a master wall?
through the wall is fucking
Through the
ridiculous, bro. Somebody point me to the best eater cause my ass and my anus.
Huh?
What?
Because your ass and your anus? They hate us because they anus?
They hate us cause they ain't us.
Not genuinely, bro?
Wait. Is that the same thing?
Oh,
God his ass.
Yeah, I think it was. I think that's exactly what happened to the thing, bro.
nice!
There's no way he's got it back, bro. I'm out of repellent.
What's that key? Is that a key?
Where?
Oh no, that's.
It's a fucking burrito, bro.
There's nothing here, bro. We use that to get the fucking code.
Is that all this is for, bro? This
Okay,
go.
maybe take it downstairs or some shit though.
Just plug into anything else. I guess not. Shit, man. What happened to that chicken?
Chicken just ran. Oh, the chicken might have been important.
Was I here already?
I don't remember. I think you were. This is where the spooky Asian shit came out, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think we might throw in the. We might got thrown in the tower, bro. Cause I genuinely don't know.
In the garden.
We never found anything in the garden, did we?
Just food.
Cause bro. There's nothing. Like,
But this game is way harder than it used to be.
basement. The answers are in the basement. Flex's eye.
Wait, what?
Is it a bomb? What are you talking about? What the fuck?
What's a ride? I don't know anything about this guy's room, bro.
Reflections. Remember, you have one more crowbar. You can exit from the back. Oh, the code. 0792.
I don't have time for this. What do you mean I don't have time for this? Bro, what's...
Bro, just get out the room. Get the room, bro.
It's not a fucking... I don't know what to do, bro.
You have a crowbar.
What is that gonna help me, bro?
Fucking the door.
Oh, there's more. Sprint. There's 8 things wrong in this room, bro.
What's wrong, Reflection?
Bro, I don't fucking know. This shit's backwards, first of all. Oh, there's 2 rooms. We gotta figure out the difference. What's the time?
3 minutes.
Oh, okay, 3. Okay. I was stressing. Okay. What's the difference? One's mirrored, though. Press that on the floor.
Are you supposed to click it?
not on the floor. I need your help. I need you to look at other things too.
You can't even interact with anything. That's what I'm confused about. The food, microwave on the top left, fridge on the right. Reflections is live.
What's awry?
Those are fireworks, bro. You collect them posts.
Something must be different.
The fridge and shit's missing.
Oh, this guy's all the way over
Like
here,
the
bro.
fridge.
This guy's all the way over here, bro. Where does he go? He goes over here?
Yeah, and then move the fridge. Oh my god, you're tweaking.
Bro, there's not even...
GG's, bro.
Bro, where the fuck am I? Let go of the fucking fridge, bro.
GG's, bro. GG's, bro.
Where's the fridge go?
Beside the table over there. No, to your left.
To my left.
Behind you, behind you.
What table? What table?
There, it goes there.
Oh, there. I see. Okay. Where's this guy go? Okay. Two
You
more.
need a microwave. There's a microwave that goes on the over there, the right side.
This is the microwave? Okay.
I'll go back. A chair, maybe.
Yeah, the chair.
That chair.
TV, bed.
That bed. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Oh, okay. I think you have enough time, bro. You just keep going. Check the closet though. Behind you?
Oh, fuck, I have to check all this shit too?
Probably.
There's so many doors.
It's kind of lost in suspense. Fire extinguisher, shoes. Okay. Bathroom, you got paper towel.
It's just actually like
Nine.
annoying now.
That's fine.
Paper towel, cup.
Fire
Fire
extinguisher.
extinguisher, where's the fire extinguisher?
Check in the room itself.
Just die? You know?
What can you do, bro?
Did better than I thought we were gonna get, so.
That game's actually serious, bro. I didn't know it was gonna be that serious, bro.
Are we locking in on this boulder game?
Boulder game first? Alright, let's do it. Let's do it. Rock climbing.
Alright.
Let's rumble.
Let's probably switch seats.
What will you do? Are you sure?
Yeah, cause get the
Oh, wire. Oh, bro. Like, why'd you hit me off, bro?
I didn't do that, bro. Skin select. Settings. Controls. It's gonna give you Xbox controls, but it should work. What's it work? Join game. Host game. Private lobby. Settings. Does it work with this? Just what the fuck?
Okay.
Swag. Can you?
That's me.
Hell, you got bet you in this game.
Start game? No? What are you confused about?
Just about like, how do I get you in this thing? There's no like add player button. Talk about stats. Unbanned players. Show lobby.
Maybe it's not a local player.
I swear it was, bro.
So who?
Let me check the game. Force control. Online co-op only. Family sharing. Oh.
Yeah, no local. Alright, schedule when it is done.
Alright, let me download this game real quick.
Oh my gosh. Damn. Family co-op.
What do you want to watch in the meantime?
I don't know. Reaction times?
Reaction time.
Reaction times? Alright, let's turn it up. What's gonna be? Let's react to other Twitch streams.
Right to other Twitch streams?
Yeah, let's see what's like the biggest streams out right now.
What game? What?
Just chatting.
Just chatting? Alright, let me start the download. Oh my god. I'm so sorry.
Okay, last minute.
Is that Lil Tay? Is that Kai Cenat reacting to Lil Tay?
But when you did get me my flight here,
That's us
Mostly
reacting to Kai
kicked
Cenat.
at the whole twice, running ETL, running no sleep. It's not about.
Like full screen.
yeah, okay, well then come tomorrow. After that, well, he flew me on Spirit Airlines, made a joke out of it. On the first shoot, y'all saw that, and I called him out for it.
El Rocc, El Host. Oh my god, that's crazy.
Dude, I didn't do as much as I could have. Honestly, yet people want to call me disrespectful because I clucked somebody disrespecting me. It was literally him trying to disrespect me on purpose, which he actually said. He said it yesterday. He was like, he changed up his story about the Spirit Airlines flight. Haha, big joke. Like, but he said.
I don't know what he's doing.
The Amateur by Max. The Amateur demands to be seen on the biggest screen possible.
You held the gun to my wife's head.
Are you done?
No, I want them all.
The Amateur. Friday. Get tickets now.
Oh shit.
Get tickets now.
Come on, one more game.
Past my bedtime.
One more game.
There's a lot of assholes screaming.
One more.
Last one, Uncle Keanu.
This time for real.
Game on and on with high-octane Rogers Xfinity Internet.
They had a fucking Twitter feed, bro.
Nah, I don't know why they didn't lower my mic. Yes, sir. Cover on the way.
Nah, he's in a
Valencia.
community.
This shit too hard.
Oh, play it.
Nah, I just watching this clip. I gotta keep going through com. Half of my players injured by Tay Too Smooth. You niggas is weenies.
What the fuck?
Yeah, bro. What the? Yo, Archie, you dolphin diving. Yo, this nigga is, bro. What the fuck is this nigga doing? Yo.
What the fuck?
Bro,
why is it our chat
bro?
going as fast as
You
his?
serious?
Don't watch that. Don't watch that.
What the fuck?
We can pretend it's our chat.
Oh, that's me. Sorry.
You good.
Actual
Imagine the entire Olympics. Y'all want to see that? This track sounds 10 times better. Justin talk about Dabo almost getting the B&B, bro.
Literally told Wayne to lock that shit. Tay reminded Wayne, hey Wayne, make sure you lock the doors. Yeah, so that's how we know it wasn't. We pull up the next we're coming back and I get a call. I'm like, who's calling me? The unknown number. And I get a text, have a text.
What's this nigga doing? Oh shit, that's a crazy part.
What fell? That's what fell. It's like the ray gun schematic. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, that's tough.
I think he's doing a fucking unboxing video. Bro.
Actually, kind of
That's
smooth.
tough. Well, when are you open your PO box?
What? Bro, read the chat, bro.
You know what I'm saying? Dark Step, this for the 5.
Open a P.O. box.
Bro, chat.
Shit, let me open a Patreon next, bro. The fuck?
Chat, let us know if Mad Moosh open up a PO box.
Not bad. Not bad, chat. The P.O. box, by the way.
Ass saying, yo, we done this for 8 years, nigga. Like saying like we done this for 8 years. Make sure you tag her in the title. Make sure you do a joint chat with her channel so that all your people are all in the same chat together. And what else was one thing? There was one more thing.
Should you tag her in the title?
It's some Instagram thing. I forgot what it was. Like tag on the Instagram and make sure y'all together up until your prom. Yeah.
So, this is
But I did. But where I stepped in, I said, I ain't gonna lie. Like nobody does 200%. Like Tay is not even a streamer. She doesn't even stream. She dropped. But what did I tell you before this? I said, bro, if you doing shit with Lil Tay, you are gonna give them what they want, gang. But nigga, it's just a bad experience. It is what it is, though. But I had to get involved because I'm saying like,
yeah, I literally had to call Kai. I forgot what he was doing, nigga. I had to call you, bro. I was like, please talk to this manager, please, bro. The nigga told us something like, he kept saying, I
Lil Tay in fucking 2025,
bro.
He
told you that? Let me see get back in this shit. So this is. How many more people till I get an ad?
It depends on if they have ads on.
Got him. You get past. That's okay. I can bubble. Didn't break it? Can you just shoot it? I have no bubble. No bubble.
Imagine having this many people.
Oh.
Not having one person in the chat would be crazy, bro.
Look at all these weights here for.
Bubble 4. Why didn't you use
this game?
It's the worst time to be getting again, bro.
I mean, it's fine. He just didn't press Q, bro.
Oh shit, Zatar?
He just like kind of.
Oh, they got 4 minutes.
It's okay. I lucky sold for no reason, bro.
Alright, Spider-Man gameplay, bro. That's what we need to be watching.
Watching stuff.
Fuck this Magneto gameplay.
Let's see, 22 viewers.
Gameplay.
22 viewers get these many comments, bro?
Bro, this is like the whole time. This is like more than one person repeated, you know?
I am ready to put on a show.
Yeah, 22 viewers, bro. That's
my gosh.
At least 20 times us, bro.
Okay. Oh no, I don't want to promote here.
You don't want to promote here?
Nah.
Why not, bro?
Because isn't that like frowned upon?
I mean, yeah, pretty much, but I don't think anybody's gonna fucking watch our stream from this stream, bro.
Yeah,
we're just watching his stream.
That's right. Damn.
Yo, find some fucking Spider-Man gameplay. Just search Spider-Man and see what Best Spider-Man globally, #1 NA.
What is that?
So yeah, he said it at the top, bro.
It doesn't even look like it's from Spider-Man. Is that a skin? Oh fuck.
I was playing the Thing, bro. I was playing. What are you playing?
Bucky? No, Punisher.
Damn, bro.
Oh, Spider-Man might have got banned though, so.
Old Spice. This guy's still out here?
Agent.
This guy been retired, bro.
This guy been.
He's been out the league.
I've been seeing this nigga since I was in middle school, bro.
When did this guy retire, bro? Average Punisher gameplay. Why is he so fucking close to the camera,
yeah,
bro?
crazy,
I broke the amplifier. I broke the amplifier. I broke it.
You got it, buddy. My phone.
No question, bro.
Get the fuck out of here, bro.
No question.
This guy's yelling.
Nice, Susan. Walk up.
Alright, bro.
That's crazy.
Jesus Christ, man. We got more Rivals Spider-Man gameplay.
You can watch YouTube videos at this point.
Alright. What's the download looking like? 50%? Okay, not bad. Marvel, Rivals, Spider-Man, gameplay. Fucking we need that
Bro,
Rage.
let's do Wordle, fam. Fuck
Get
it.
the Rage B gameplay, bro. You wanna do Wordle or you wanna Sporkle, bro?
Let's do both, bro. Let's do Wordle and then a Sporkle.
Alright, let's content max, bro.
Content.
The art of a strategy.
I'll fuck with that video. Let's watch this short, bro.
Making Celestial Player Rage quit and throw his team's game using Rage Bait Spider-Man. Our target was originally this hella here, so that's why we hit him with the solo ult. But little did I know I was Rage Baiting their Adam Warlock accidentally. Here he is completely lacking, so we have to hit him with a beautiful combo. But we don't stop there. Hella also wants the smoke. Who else is next? Does Thor want it as well? I think he does. Hey buddy, get off of my cart. Good boy. Now let me finish you off. Okay, I didn't know he was like that. Anyways, I quickly make it back to point, and Jeff got Adam Warlock in his ult. So it's time to hit him with the double team. That is 6 very quick deaths for him, but he thinks he's sneaky. He tries to use his ult and get his team back in the fight, but I swing in at the speed of light to to save the day. And we catch Cloak lacking, and we join his party he has going on in here. But I quickly leave because I don't think I was invited. Anyways, they all left the party, and I catch him alone. Am I invisible? Anyways, I think it's time to hit Hella with another solo ult, so she just doesn't go in the Cloak ult. Okay, well, Hella had enough and swapped to Namore. But Adam Warlock still doesn't know how to position himself, so he's just asking himself to get bullied. He's not even making it hard at this point. But this is a perfect time for a huge ult. And Namor ults me. Awesome, fast forward time. And me and Cloak are in a very intense battle. And Black Panther is just AFK in the distance, probably arguing in chat with his team. Adam Warlock is currently 3-10 with 0 final hits, so he's definitely the one taking the blame right now. Well, he just got his first final hit. But I'm not taking that, so I'm getting my get back on him. Where do you think you're running? To be fair, none of his teammates are helping him at all. That team chat must be a massacre. He just cannot stay alive. Anyways, that is the end of round 1. We're sitting at 25 with 13 final hits. And our op is in the trenches going 5-11 with 2 final hits. Looking good. It's not looking good for Adam Warlock, though. It's been 40 seconds, and he's still sitting in spawn, probably arguing in chat. Fast forward another 20 seconds, and he's standing still, letting Jeff kill him. He is furious. Well, let's take his Cloak out in the meantime. He's still just standing still in his soul form. I find him again, and he's still standing still, doing nothing. Well, he's healing himself, so I don't kill him again, but that's about it. Anyways, I catch him or lacking, so I'm going to solo ult him. And look here, it's Adam Warlock in soul form again, just standing still. Hey there, buddy. Well, Namor swapped to Iron Fist, so it's time for the 1v1, and it wasn't even close. But he called Black Panther in for backup, so I'm out of there. Anyways, that is game over. Another epic victory. I tried to invite him for a post-game interview, but he instantly queued into another game, so I couldn't invite him. But like and
It kills me, bro. That's actually so funny.
That's just demonic, bro. If I had to experience
using Rage Bait Spider-Man against another Spider-Man and typing the score in chat every time I kill him. Today's game is a good one. We start off trying to get a pull off the map, and we failed, unfortunately. But I see we have Spider-Man competition quickly. He tries running away from me, but it just doesn't work like that. We quickly hawk him down and slime him out. But he comes right back. He must not get it. Right in front of all of his teammates. He is absolutely vanquished. So I think it's time to update score in chat with a 2-0. But he's not having it. He's trying to kill my Jeff, so you know we have to slide for him. He wasted all of his utility on Jeff, so we have a free kill here waiting for us. And that is a 3-0. But he quickly respawns through Rocket's beacon, and he is furious. He wants me dead. He is not a fan of the Rage Bait Spider-Man, but he got himself into a sticky situation. He fed into what we want. That is 4-0. This guy will never get a kill on me. Let's remind him in chat. Anyways, we have an ult waiting for him. He is completely caught off guard. This is a perfect time. Okay, well, I guess we don't even need it. I guess we'll save it for next time. Anyways, that is 5-0 now. This guy has to make some adjustments. He either needs to figure out how to kill me or swap off Spider-Man. Well, he almost had it right there. He was prepared for the solo ult. Maybe he's catching on, but he is absolutely fuming right now. He is trying his absolute hardest to get one kill on me at least. But no matter what he does, I still manage to add to my own score. Now that is 6-0. Oh, but look, Rage Bait Spider-Man is working at its finest. We have Spider-Man completely locked in targeting us, going 0-6 with his own teammate trash talking him, ruining the vibe of the other team. This is exactly what we want, but it keeps getting worse. He's had so many chances to kill me, but keeps falling short every time. Their team is absolutely ruined. Just from us. It didn't even take much, but let's see if they can bounce back and recover from this. Looking at chat starting round 2, it doesn't seem like they can, but we're going to ask and see if he's staying on Spider-Man. I don't think his team wants him to, because he is currently 0-7. No, not our 1v1 score. He is literally 0-7, and I'm 7-0. The only person I've killed is him, and I instantly get him again. He tried swapping to Star-Lord, and it seems like it didn't help him out at all. But we're pulling up to his spawn to spawn camp him, because we need to get as many kills on him as possible before the game ends. And that is 9. We still stay at his spawn and try to catch him again, but he barely made it away. This guy is fighting for his life in spawn. This is supposed to be the safe place. We get him 3 HP and he flees back into spawn. Well, he stayed in spawn for a while, so we had to go back to point. But we did not forget about him. We're still locked in on him. And we're going to post the score in chat right next to his teammates. Unfortunately, that is game over. We only got to 10-0. That is truly unfortunate. Well, not only did he just go through one of the worst games he's probably ever played, his teammates are still flaming him in chat. They have no clue what that guy just had to deal with. The chat is filled with a bunch of GGs. Anyways, I stream these games every day live on Twitch at 6 a.m. Make sure to go follow and tune in, but here are the final stats. We ended at a perfect 10-0, and he ended at a perfect 0-10. All of my kills are on him. Pretty successful Rage Bait.
I would actually stop playing, bro.
Imagine you trying to play Spider-Man.
I'll never, I would never. No, bro, but that should be happening.
Rage Bait Spider-Man and typing nice try in chat after every kill in Celestial for free win. Today we have a very good game on our hands. Right off the bat, we have Spider-Man competition. Okay, maybe not much competition. Well, anyway, since Spider-Man is doing whatever he is doing, we decided to go for Black Panther. We're here to spread love and positivity, so let's type nice try in chat. Well, we already got a fish to bite. He says -5 out of 10 Rage Bait. So let's see if that's really true. We catch that same guy using his magic ult. Well, that was a really nice try from him. Let's type it in chat. Anyways, their Spider-Man is back, and he isn't floating on the ground this time. Wow, that was a really nice try. But we catch him lacking again, and he thinks he can flee into spawn. Where do you think you're going, buddy? That was truly a nice try. He missed the spawn door by a little though. Oh no, they finally got me. That was a very nice try for me. Oh, the ops are saying nice try to me. How kind. But it looks like Mr. Tough Guy got upset. We're playing a 3-stack of Smurfs that we're throwing, supposedly. But the love and positivity got them upset for some reason. Now they're going to try. Let's see how it goes. We end up taking out Hella, but we lose the fight. And now he's getting excited in chat. Now we really have to lock in, because if we lose this, we're cooked. He's getting really active in chat. But it's okay, because Jeff gets 4 of them with his ult. But they're not happy about that one. So let's type nice try in chat to keep them calm. Anyways, that is it for round 1. They only pushed it 2 points, so we can win this right now. Let's say nice try in chat, though, real quick. But in round 2, we come out strong. There is no option to lose this game. Storm is just completely lost, so we quickly take her out. But it doesn't stop there. We also get Adam Warlock, so we swiftly capture first point. Things are looking perfect for us right now. Me and Jeff slime out Luna Snow, but I don't think her teammates are surviving that Scarlet all. So we have to slide for our team and get her out. We're too locked in right now. We're not even typing nice try in chat. But I try to hit Luna Snow with my ult, and she freezes me at the same time. Okay, someone has to be hacking, but we come back and help our team, and we end up capturing second point. So it's time to get back to the nice tries in chat. Fast forward to the next fight. Bucky was really annoying, so I decided to solo ult him. We're so close to this win, and we have 4 minutes left. We cannot lose this. But we find Adam Warlock completely out of position, which makes him a free kill. But they are low-key holding us here. We've been here for almost 3 minutes, but I have my ult back, and I hit the best ult of all time. But there's a loose kitty on the point. Black Panther is dashing all around the point, and nobody shoots him. So he stalls enough time for Invis Woman to come back. Then she stalls time for them to portal on site. How do we let this happen? And I portal into spawn. Awesome. But we kill everyone, and now Invis Woman has ult to sustain even longer for them. Unfortunately for them, though, no one can make it back in time, so she dies, and we win. That was a really nice try. Let's remind them in chat. We have to keep their vibes up, but you know, we have to attempt the post-game interview. 2 of the 3 instantly got off the game, but the one who stayed online joined. He doesn't have a mic, but we asked him why his buddies got offline, and he acted clueless. So I kicked him, but he got one of them back online and invited me. So you know I had to join. Wait, it's my best buddy who was typing in the chat earlier. We have to say hi to this guy. But he says, don't hi me, boy. Maybe let's try what's good this time. And he says, don't in all caps. This guy is a little feisty kitty, so I have to ask how he's feeling to check up on him. And he responds saying, I made his month. Oh, I'm glad my love and positivity reached others, so I asked to be friends with him, but he doesn't seem very happy. Why is he so mad right now? It's not because of me, right? There is no way, but we asked to see if he was truly trying. And he has some kind words for us. I think he's warming up to me now. Okay, anyways, he's trying to sell TikTok usernames now, but I stream these games live every day on Twitch at 6/7. Make sure you guys tune in. Anyways, like and follow for more. Using Rage Bait Spider-Man and typing Spider-Man and typing question marks in chat after every kill in Celestial for free wins. Spider-Man is finally not banned, so it's time to terrorize the ops. We quickly locate the most vulnerable target using the leaderboard. Our target today is going to be this Selaka, and she is quickly walloped. That is a swift first death for her. But then we also run down Captain America, and he died to nothing? Our aura is just too immense, I guess. Anyway, Psylocke is back into the fight, which we did not grant her permission to do this. She must not get it. So we knock her out with the overhead slam, then type question marks in chat to see if she can explain her decision-making. But she has no explanation. So we must ramp this up with a solo ult. Whoopsies! Oh no! I missed her and accidentally killed Mantis. I sincerely apologize. Well, Psylocke is getting way too close to the fight. We have to eliminate her. Then let's throw some question marks in chat. Well, that's the end of a 100-0 round 1. But it gets even better in round 2. We hit them with the, you done warming up? Text in chat, and we got a fish to bite. Our buddy George here says, dude, keep typing in chat, please. Whatever you say, man. Let's get back to business. So the Psylocke from round 1 swapped to Star-Lord. Nice try, buddy. I'm still going to kill you. Okay, well, he has some buff bodyguards this time. I'll wait till he's alone. Well, actually, he brought the heat to me. That's a good sign he isn't happy. But things get even worse for him. He somehow doesn't kill me and lets me heal. So you know we're spinning back on him. And he somehow loses that fight. But he instantly cocoons to try and kill me again. Aw, look at him. He's so cute. Let's throw more question marks in chat, though. But I fled the scene. And I come back to an easy 1 tap on him. What was he doing? Does anyone know? Let's ask in chat, maybe. He didn't respond, but our buddy George from earlier did. Oh, he's so helpful. He wants to solve my confusion. So cute. Is he flirting with me? Anyways, we take this to the spawn doors, and Star-Lord is looking very vulnerable, so he gets hit with the solo Jeff ult. This guy can't be happy right now. But Black Panther comes to slide for him, so we have to slide for our Jeff. I hit Black Panther with a solo ult of my own, but he tried to escape it and failed. It got too sticky, but let's hit the chat with some question marks real quick. But they are not happy now. Star-Lord is solo ulting Jeff, and I am not sliding for Jeff. I am good. I can't give anyone satisfaction. I have 0 deaths right now. But look at them. They're fiending to kill me, but I'm not letting it happen. Anyways, we spot our buddy George, so it's time to do some warm-up punches. Okay, we're ready to go in. Hey, buddy, I know you love me from the words you say in chat, but unfortunately, I have to do this. What is he doing? Question marks in chat. Anyways, that's the end of a very close game. But George is quick to explain what happened. And he says, I'm so good. Oh, thank you, Georgie. I really appreciate that. Anyways, here are the final stats. We're sitting perfectly at 20-0, and our op is in the trenches going 3-9. Pretty good performance from him.
What? Those niggas get this good, bro.
Is in the trenches, bro. Like, there's one video where he's like only targeting the healer, and it's actually crazy.
I understand why Spider-Man gets Rambo slow.
Who is the most annoying character to face in Marvel Rivals? Well, one of my biggest ops has to be Moon Knight, for obvious reasons like that, so I decided to see how many times I can kill this guy in one game. That guy just let me...
I was done?
Sure, buddy, why not? Schedule 1. So in there. No, this game does not condone the manufacturing, trade, or illicit sale of drugs. Let me check my settings real quick. 90 Camera box, sure, bro. Ooh, wait, hold on. This sounds like some shit you hear Freddie Gibbs on, bro. someone call this one? Organization.
What the fuck?
How you typing?
How you typing, bro?
Oh, because you're just pressing the buttons that it corresponds to on the keyboard with the controller.
Oh, that makes sense.
What do you want to entitle this? This company.
Yeah.
What's the plan here? Do what?
I don't got a name still. Go now.
This is actually tough, bro.
Listen, I was sauteing Arm & Hammer every night. You know what I lost this song. Sauteing Arm & Hammer. Tax season. Spray tan.
Are you the king of two-liners, bro?
Bro, I'm like half asleep, but I woke up at 5 a.m. today, bro. I usually lock in. Hey, yo! My AK got a voice of an angel. Fuck, bro. Voice of an angel, give you a halo. I'm just trying to move my payload.
Mexican, call it peso.
In the back, you know how I like to move. Crash the whip on the skin, you know. Fuck, yeah. Vapor rub in the tuck. Got the gun, you gotta duck. Quack, 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 quack.
I said you gotta duck.
Goon Rocc anthem. Goon Rocc anthem. Yeah, you know we spazzing. Throw you in the chasm.
You know I had to blam.
Yo, bitch had to grab him. Yeah. The bitch should eat a feather dick all night. You can keep her. Rent a supercar for a day.
Okay.
I'm not a rapper, bro. I'm not a rapper.
Wait.
I'm not a rapper.
Rent a supercar for a day, whipping it like OJ. I'ma beat the case like I'm TK doing the race.
Don't worry.
Terrible call.
Don't worry. It's about confidence, bro.
Nah, listen. Saute on the hammer.
Oh, what's the hook?
Saute on the hammer. What else is there? Give me another.
You got a spatula. I use the blammer. That's real arms and hammer. Firearms, cook the shit on the stove like.
Call from Delhi. I'm talking to scammers. Talking to scammers. Got the camera. I'm jamming.
Kool-Aid jammers.
Kool-Aid jammers.
Oh yeah.
Young and reckless.
Young and restless.
Breast cancer, she breast. Out of breath. So
fucking
blue. What if blue stands for something?
Yo. It's not getting any better, bro. E? What's under E?
Wait, what the fuck?
Copy the title. Blowing loads under euphemisms. Fuck. Said this long enough. Be wary of your surroundings when you're dealing. Police will notice that you're handing over product to providing samples to customers.
You see the game, you know what to do it, man.
Yes, sir. So do we start with the plan, or we gotta buy a seat? Oh, okay, we start with plan.
We have $0 for him.
We got $80 on our card though.
Needs water. Use tremors.
Bet. That's the vault. That's the safe house. Okay. Get the teapot. Yeah.
Okay, that's how.
Do you need to turn the sensitivity down?
Low key, I think mouse and keyboard's better.
Okay.
Yeah, mouse and keyboard's better. How do I?
Let's just click and drag.
Yeah, mouse and keyboard is better.
Oh, there's a move all button. I don't know what the button is. So you gotta water the. Utilities probably cost money in this game.
Think so?
Bro, they got us watching for cops and shit. They probably got everything. Bro, what the fuck, bro?
What did you do
that backflip though?
Wait, am I doing too much?
I don't know. Pour water over the target. You're not even pouring
Oh
over
my
the
god, it's not moving.
target, bro. There you go. You got it. All right, now trim the hedges.
Oh, this game is serious, bro.
Okay.
Package all the wheat here. So we'll do it.
Click and drag from your inventory. Product, package. Oh, pack.
I have to do this. What? How much is that?
I guess we're going. I just figured we're doing. I guess we're just doing G's, bro. I don't know.
Yes. Okay, G's.
Place in the hopper, bro. What is this, Minecraft? No way.
This is like serious, bro.
This is like a job, bro. This is like a. This is a 9 to 5, bro. Or 5 to 9.
You think my laptop can handle this or not?
It doesn't look that intense, bro.
Right? Okay. Maybe I download on my laptop.
You get this on your laptop, bro. We can play together.
Yeah.
Alright.
Done? Pack?
Output. Drag the output into your inventory. Yeah.
Okay. Then
exit. Escape.
Okay. Oh, you got van. This is serious.
RV, bro.
RV?
Should you put your stuff back or no?
Nah, fuck. We just carry it
outside.
Oh.
Is that a customer?
Sorry, old boy.
Uncle Nelson. Morning, bud. Come talk to me after you're done everything in RV. Okay, so I guess there's still something to do in RV.
Oh, yeah.
Respond to your customers' messages in the messaging app.
What the fuck's the message at? Where's my phone?
Check your bed, maybe? I don't know. Your table? You have a phone? Oh, top right, top left.
That's escape. How do I do that?
Press it. Tab.
Ah, yeah, you play this game. Hello, I'm after 2 times OG Kush. I could pay 60 for it.
Andy. Oh, they got like a reliability meter. What is that?
Like if they pay, I guess.
Oh, you gotta schedule your fucking shit. Gas station 6. Okay. Go back. Doug.
Oh,
OG
shit.
Kush 90. Yeah, you got enough. You got enough in stock. Meet you outside the Blue House. Okay, one guy at the gas station, one guy at the Blue House.
Gotcha.
Oh, this guy paying big bucks for the this guy.
He's not reliable,
He's not
bro.
reliable, though.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
We're doing all at the same time, bro? We think we can cut that?
6 a.m. to 12 p.m. We got time, bro.
What time is it?
I don't know.
There's no time on the phone? Go back. Press home button.
6 a.m.
Alright, one Blue House, one. You gotta hop in your truck, bro?
Yeah.
Lovely day. That's one. Wheels. Business with the fellas, down to the motel. Nelson's package. Everything. Okay. Okay, let's take a drive. Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got 8. we got deals for 6.
You could drop. Nigga, this game is sick.
We're gonna drive to town?
Yeah. Oh, whoa.
Yo, somebody else be fucking fire insurance and shit.
What the fuck? Bro.
You might need a controller to drive. Low key. Might be easier for you. Yeah?
Yeah, a little bit.
Where the fuck are we? Like fucking Texas or Nevada or some shit, bro? Arizona?
Nah, this game is so proper. I did not think it was like this.
This game's still in early access, too.
$20. Oh, this game would have... bro, I ain't gonna lie. This game would have done numbers in high school, fam.
Oh, for real, bro.
You mean Emmett would have ran this up, bro.
Fucking Justin, bro?
Justin? Loki, tell Justin about this. He might tweak, bro. Honestly, yo, I think Justin will love this game.
Yeah, for real.
It's a gas station, yeah?
Serena Flats, yeah, gas station, and then one Blue House.
How do I exit?
Garbage.
Cigarettes?
Siggy.
I can't figure out what it is. Actually, just garbage. Alright. Someone back here, yeah?
There's a guy.
Shout out my boy.
Andy. Item splitting.
What is it? What did I do?
That's 1. That's 2. Yeah. You gotta be in your vehicle within 20 minutes. Yo, check the dumpster. Open the dumpster. Oh, this is where you hide from the cops.
Fine.
Alright, Blue House, and then where's the other guy at? Pawn shop.
Oh, it's right here. It's
You didn't even park nowhere, bro.
my boy.
Make sure you
Boy, this nigga is hot.
Legalize a ranch, bro. What is this guy talking about? You gotta do this quick, bro.
Why?
What the cops come, bro? Oh, yeah. See, look, someone's on it.
Nobody saw that shit.
Satisfaction. Oh, that's a satisfaction.
Blue House.
Yo, Blue?
Blue? Oh my god.
Oh,
that's us. You think it's this
ain't
house?
no way it's the. Okay, I thought it was the White M house. This right here? This guy looks like he's wearing a wire, bro.
But you gotta, like, relax, you know?
Make the rounds on contacting apps.
Nigga, you like that, my boy? Oh,
he like that. He like that.
Yeah. OG. Really just want OG. Yo.
Check the phone.
I'm just trying to get a safe space. Let's go. That nigga is high too, bro. Let's park right here.
Motel. Oh, you gotta pull up to those guys, right? Later.
Oh yeah, I do.
Tap.
Oh fuck.
Make the contacts. Oh, okay. Chelsea. Unlock this customer by giving him a free sample.
Okay. So I have to go on the map? Where's the map?
No map.
Use your map to see the approximate location, monitor, common focus.
Press M maybe? Press enter though.
Enter?
No, there was like some shit at the top.
Where?
It's gone now. What is this? Oh, what the heck?
That's right. Fair enough.
Oh, doctor's office. It's right behind you.
Oh, it's right here. Oh, that's okay. What are the chances?
Yeah.
Oh.
Give her a free sample.
You can have one.
Give her a free sample of fucking watering pot, bro. She's just gonna light up right here in the middle of work? That's not true. Oh, very nice of you hearing from me. Okay, new customer unlock. Check it.
Yeah.
Making the rounds, purchase soil from the hardware store.
Oh, I just seen the hardware store.
That's right, it's the blue building right there. To the right. Does that say kook? Jacob. Oh shit.
This is soil?
Yeah, two? Yeah. 2x soil.
Yeah. That's it?
I think we might need some more baggies, bro. We only have like 4 left.
This guy like
it's $1 each.
We get bread, bro. These guys just give us bread. Let's just get 20. Just call it a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Alright.
Body search in progress. What do you mean body search in progress?
Someone getting body search? Turn around. Where's the cop?
You saw a cop?
Oh, there's a cop car at the bank. To your left. Right there.
Police station there too, bro.
That's what I meant. That's right next to the bank. Oh, yo, he's body searching you, bro. Bro, you gotta move it. You gotta hide it when he's on the thing.
How do I do it?
You gotta hide. You gotta just hide it when he's on the thing. Click and hold to conceal items.
What the fuck?
He's got profiled, bro. What the heck? I say you and your uncle.
So crazy.
Ball intelligence. Okay. Yo, what did we get? 6 pillies? 6 packs of pillies?
Pillies?
Check your inventory, bro. Look at that.
Oh, we got hella shit.
We got 5 seeds? Do you wanna go buy another flower pot or something?
That's smart, yeah. Let's up this. Let's up the operation.
Cause you bought 2 pots of things that are.
Yeah, that's good, bro. This one?
Oh, we can't get a pot.
Can't get a pot. Yeah. Maybe this one. Okay, this.
Oh, it's a grow tent.
Ooh.
The whole tent, yeah.
This one?
Second one.
$100. That's efficient. We spent too much money.
Oh, we gotta go to the ATM to fucking
deposit it.
Right across the street.
Yes, sir. This game is serious.
This is actually crazy, bro. Some Steve Lacy shit, bro.
Oh, I bought 2.
Alright, man.
I bought 2. Oh, fuck.
Just drive home. What time is it, man? We do this shit in a day? All in day work. She's serious, bro.
I'm driving sick. I'm sick, bro. Yo, one hand Louis. One hand. No hands.
You do it? No hands? No hands?
Oh my, how am I doing it? This is crazy.
Yeah.
I go lie. I think we get jumped on this, bro.
Yeah, I think we can definitely get jumped on.
Let me call it. I bet we get him on tonight, bro.
Nah, it's like 11, bro. He's probably asleep by now.
No. Nah.
Live on. So we only have 2 baggies left.
Smart call, though. We got 20 now, though. Use the first thing. So like multiple people, you got one person growing and the other person selling shit?
I guess like you got one person fucking packaging the product, one person trimming the plants and shit.
Yeah, this is the whole operation, bro. Yeah, he's WC. This is sick. I'm so impressed, bro. I'm genuinely so impressed. I did not.
This shit's actually like so fucking gameplay, bro. Oh fuck.
So why did my shit do a 360? I don't get it.
Bro, I don't know what you do. I don't know what you're doing, bro. Alright. Should we call it a day?
I think you do, bro.
What time do we need to wake up, bro?
6 a.m. So that's what we started the day. I guess earliest to 7.
I guess we need a certain amount of sleep. Just sleep. Saturday, day 6. Product sold 6 OG Kush. Okay, experience. Level up and shit.
There it goes. Level up.
Day 2. Nelson, no. We got caught with the pillies.
Operations. Oh, fam. GG's, bro.
Now we gotta start a new town, bro. Complete the prologue. Staff don't work for free.
They'll automatically from their briefcase on their bed. If it's empty at the start of new shift, they won't work. Oh, that's crazy.
Oh, we gotta pay them in the morning and shit.
If they get staff.
No, let's get Justin, bro. Let's just get Justin, bro.
Small time drug dealer from the south. The first time with no cash, no product, no contact. I didn't even tell him.
This shit's actually gonna be tough, bro.
The only way to make money.
Time to get to work. Shit, make me feel like like a Lucia's live, bro.
Yeah, bro, it's also the time, bro. Fuck.
This shit's cinematic as hell, bro.
This is sick, bro. I'm thoroughly impressed.
TBGS, yo. Why is this shit like that shit?
I wanna be successful, bro.
I just wanna be. Yeah, you wanna be successful the same way, bro.
Blowing loads underneath.
Yes, sir. Let them know. Let these new people know, bro.
Blowing loads underneath.
What if they made this game like South Park, bro? The difficulty scaler was the skin tone color.
That seems a little racist.
Female?
I think this is. Yeah, I think that's this though.
Blue afro. Blue.
I think we'll come with it.
Oh yeah, that boy chonky.
Yeah, I like
Facial detail intensity.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. That boy going through it, bro. We're trying to free Uncle Nelson. Eyeball color. Upper eyelid resting position. What the fuck do you mean by that, bro? This guy doesn't have eyelids already.
This nigga is
You got jaundice, bro.
jaundice.
Oh. Wait, nah, just low. Just do the lower ones up and the upper ones high.
What do you mean?
Like raise the lower ones up. Yeah. Bro, you can't even do that in real life, bro.
Yeah, I know, this is crazy.
What could possibly be next? Yo, this reminds me of somebody.
This nigga looks treacherous, bro.
Alright, what's the fit? Oh my god, yo, this should definitely profile you based off what you're wearing. Yo, what the hell am I looking at? Jorts? No way.
Jeans. I feel like it's kind of crazy having no shade jeans, bro. Those are Birkenstock stuff.
Give him some Louboutins, bro. With the red bottoms.
This nigga looks treacherous. Imagine, but he looks like the sleaziest drug dealer. Are we happy?
I think so.
Yeah. I just imagine just to clock it in, and this is his boss.
All right.
Bro, we lost everything? That's crazy.
I've heard you're in some trouble. Best not to talk over the phone. Oh, Uncle Nelson. Go find a payphone. We got 100 on the card.
Oh.
Wait, we can punch?
Yeah, I'll punch it right now.
What's in the whip, bro?
Let me there anything else I can? Is there anything here?
We just got baggies, 10 baggies, so it's just hard reset. Okay, that was just the prologue. Escape.
And then you got both of those still there.
Yeah, so literally how we started.
You got these.
Except the things aren't fully grown yet.
Alright. Should I finish going then? Like, should I?
We just gotta hit the payphone. Oh no. Oh yeah, that bitch already stoned. No, you can't. You don't want to hire them off rip, bro. What the heck?
I'm just. No, they're talking.
I'm at a payphone.
Is that a dildo? That's what I said.
Oh,
it's a bong.
Pick it up. Can you pick it up? Take it.
How can I take it?
Okay.
What is that? Is that weed?
Can you take it? Like press the number key maybe? Sorry? No. That's not. Is that a car? Yo, don't get caught with this shit in your hand, bro. What's that thing on the road right there? Goddamn, good to hear your voice, buddy. Looks like your luck finally ran out. The feds locked me up. Oh man, we gotta get this guy out, bro. Back before I moved to Serena Flats, I used to live out Highland Point. Okay, you know people here? If memory serves, I got some cash to. Oh, town hall. Okay, there's 3 spots we gotta go to get.
Whoa. Whoa. What the fuck was that?
You're being searched, bro. You ain't got nothing, man. Fuck this guy. wait. I didn't mean like that.
Wait. What did I put down?
No, what if they caught you with that bong, bro? That would be
crazy.
Okay, so near the fountain.
Dude,
near the canal. This is the canal.
Okay, what's he say?
He said near the canal.
Like the stash around the supermarket, the stash near the fountain.
I think you gotta check these address.
This thing right here.
Must be it. Oh yeah. Dead drop. Oh, okay, so we can use this in the future. Right click to move all.
Oh, okay, I see.
The fountain. This. You gotta right click. Right click. Oh, it's a different. What the fuck? It controls me. Is the last one?
On the supermarket.
Find some people to talk to, bro. Find some customers. Right there.
Yeah, this guy got us bread. Head back to our review.
There's more bread than we had before.
Yeah, we already made a profit. That's where I parked the RV, bro. Bro, that's where I left the RV, bro.
No way.
Bro, that's where that was where the RV was, bro.
No way, bro. Are you serious?
On my mama, that's where the RV is.
No way.
Nah.
Are you serious? Bro. They blew up the whole thing? I didn't know we were gonna be starting from the bottom.
Shit.
Man, Justin's gonna come in here and think shit is sweet, bro. Shit is nuts.
That's not ideal. Benzie sound.
So you're gonna just say, bro, what? No way, man. Alright.
Fucking tense.
We gotta trap out the motel for a bit. Let's talk to this guy.
Oh, I'm from you see motel? You see people. What is that? What's RV noise? I don't know RV Top Dog
Entertainment. Kendrick?
Kendrick? Yeah, nigga. I'm not talking about that.
This guy's like 50 runs, bro.
Wow. This music is fire too, bro. This game is lit. March? Wonderbox. Some of it's crazy.
There are people, bro. Some of them for we delivery is crazy, bro.
Slop Shop. Taco
Ticklers.
Hotel, finally.
As if they fucking blew up our car, bro.
Our RV, our home.
Office, bro.
I'm so it's gonna be the first one. What's the one? Sometimes at a hotel. Let me listen. Is that Nixon? What? This game is literally built for us, bro.
You guys got Nixon in there, bro? Yo,
What's
happening? 421. Ain't no way they got games in the game.
It has balls.
This is like a Chrome game.
Yeah. This is how you go. You got that. You already got, bro, YouTube video for you. Beating Snake is control what? Run it, bro. You gotta be the first person to do that.
There's no way, bro.
I'm gonna search it up right now. There's not a YouTube video in here?
Yeah, I'm doing it right now.
You're doing it right now. Nah,
Nobody's done it, bro.
no one's done it.
We're gonna be here a while. Oh, corner. I died.
Alright, you take over. I'm gonna get Justin's awake, so I'm gonna try and see if he's down to.
Oh, we can save game.
Oh, fire! Hardware store.
Alright, where's that shit at? Cash for trash. Oh,
all the garbage. Say less. Bro, I gotta clean up my laptop. But I'm gonna download this. See if it works. Fire!
Fire, bro. Can I pick everything up? Oh, I can pick everything up. That's right. Can I pick more than one thing up at a time? No.
Go for it now.
Pick up. Alright, I'm gonna do some recycling real quick. Getting some money. Baby, I got your money, don't you worry.
I said, hey, baby, I got your money.
Actually, no, it's getting dark. I should probably go.
Hey. It's probably closed now, bro. How much money you getting?
$9.
$9.
We're the hardware store. What is like a store? It's a hardware store? No, it's a supermarket, right? That's not much about that. It's I pour down. Yeah, we really just got a whole ass city here.
Sister. I'm gonna show you curfew. We're gonna get back to the hotel, bro.
Where the fuck town do we live in, bro?
Huh?
What the fuck town do we live in, bro? Mandatory curfew between 9 to 5.
Bro, that's what I'm saying. Get back to the motel, bro.
I'm running, bro. I'm running my ass to the motel, bro. What time is it? Holy shit. Get away from me.
What do you want from me?
I fucking made it just in time.
Nah, bro. That's so scary. I guess you're always waking up at 7, because we slept earlier last time.
I guess it's like, what doesn't say, bro?
He said, what do you mean? I think he's like asleep.
Street rat level 1. I locked back in, bro. Locked back in.
Okay, I'm locked back in? Okay.
Hardware store.
Oh, you found it, yeah?
Yeah, it's across town. You just gotta go east. Don't assault somebody, bro. They're going to work and shit. Yeah, what kind of police state do we live in, bro? Fucking 9 to 5 curfew, bro. It's too right.
Is this the?
Oh no, it's still. Can we keep past the fountain? Yeah.
Handy Hanks. Handsy Hanks.
Hank? Hank Schrader?
Yeah, this Hank.
I like to purchase something. Okay, so we need a grow tent, soil, and a watering can. We might as well buy the plants.
Did he say it's? Did he say? Oh no, grow tent. Oh yeah.
Oh, we might need a packaging station.
Okay.
ATM across the street. It's okay. It's okay. We got money though. It's. What do we need cash for?
I guess to buy shit, like the
Illegal
seeds.
shit.
I'm gonna just say what they telling us. Grow tents, soil. Oh my god.
You're doubling up. You're doubling up. You're doubling up.
Relax. Grow tents, soil, water can, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Back to the motel. We don't have seeds though.
So we need cat. Okay, I'm gonna just.
Yeah. Just withdraw like
50.
50.
Let's say middle of the 100, bro.
Honestly, just keep 100 on cash.
Yeah, all times, yeah. God damn, this nigga got cardio, bro.
Hey, bro, he's on the he's grinding all his life, bro.
It's my fault.
Sacrifice. Also pay the price.
I forgot what you look like. I guess it's a boss, bro. Oh. You bumped that. What's it? 80. 60, yeah. Well, 60. Hmm?
Alright, we're almost ready to go. We're basically waiting. Weed seeds. We need to supply a speaker supplier.
Hoover.
Oh, Albert Hoover stash.
Albert Hoover. That message I posted that drop. I vouch for you.
Okay.
The fuck?
UG Kush, seed 30 each. We only have one pot. 30 minutes, alright. What is that apps on the phone? There's like a dealer app, bro. Dealer management, fuck. You have never recruited any dealers? Oh, we can get deliveries and shit?
Fire. Let's collect some bread though.
Open the hatch first. Oh, I think you can pick up that marijuana leaf too.
Collect that drop. Oh, is it ready already?
Where is that even at?
Let me just. Hey, bills.
Big money.
Yeah, I clicked it. Where is it?
Come out.
I see tacos.
Tacos are like,
to your right,
yeah. They're literally right here. Oh, to your right.
Right here.
Turn right.
Oh, my fault.
Yeah. Alright. Let's go find some shit.
Yeah, right in the hotel room. She got no idea, bro.
You got no idea. There's a window right into our room. You can probably see it from the window, bro.
I'm not close to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They thought of everything. You gotta take the cap off. You gotta turn it upside down. Alright. Harvest the wheat plant.
Place the soil seed biome.
Gotta buy some more stuff.
Bro, look how serious it is.
Can you recycle that and sell it for money instead?
Buy one plant tripper, package station, 10 baggies.
What was the door, bro.
Can I buy?
The ops come in.
Can I do it on the phone now though? Right?
Yeah.
Thanks, right?
Yeah.
Is it 10 baggies? One plancher minutes? Oh, I can't buy the plancher minutes. I can buy the baggies here?
Does delivery cost extra though?
Does it cost? I haven't done anything. 10 baggies, one package. That means there's another hardware store somewhere here though. That was the old one?
I don't know the guy's name, to be honest. There's 2 hardware stores in the city.
Why not? Competition's always good. Being a good citizen.
Not for any nefarious purposes.
Why would you even say that?
$6. Let's go.
Yo. He wasn't with me while I was at Handy Hanks. That's so funny. Says, cut in? Wasn't with me when I was at Handy Hanks supermarket and I'm moving drink. Super OG, I'm moving dank. Kush, smoking bush, shush. Yeah, wasn't with me at church Sunday morning. Never get that.
Okay, there'll be other ones. I need to read that shit. We just do that shit out immediately. This fucking cockblock is good.
Oh, yeah, 100% though. It's a nice rope ski.
What's the newspaper's name, bro? Talking about Uncle Nelson.
Uncle Nelson, is that shit? Nah, it's destroyed.
Talking about probably about Nixon or some shit, bro.
It's the American dream right here. Yeah, recycling.
This is the American dream?
American dream right here, bro.
I think Americans can do this, bro. I think you can go to sleep now.
Hopefully. Double checking. Walking out, bro. bro.
Yeah, 7 p.m. 12-hour nap, bro. Holy.
Bro, we did so much better on the prologue.
Bro, we fucking had a car, bro.
RV, bro.
RV.
76. He's what? Oh my god.
Oh my god, I'm like surprised. It's almost done, don't even worry, bro.
Okay.
Put that backwards. 70% grown.
Back to work. Let's explore the town.
Oh, maybe there is more, bro.
Saying.
This town is massive. Holy. What does that say? What's that? Oh, perfect. Fresh construction, bro. Damn. We could buy this building, bro. Let's go do nice office.
Office?
Nice brewery.
Sorry. Ooh, oh, my fault. Damn, what happened here? Oh. Ooh.
Damn.
Hotel? Oh, government housing. I think the Section 8 housing, bro.
Yeah, oh, maybe this is the ops, bro.
This is definitely Section 8 housing, bro.
This is where the Benzie boys are? This is where they're cooking out of?
Where's the music come from? Ground floor?
This just sound like what's that one song on
Never passive aggressive, you know how I'm like the message, you know I like.
What's that one song of like with More Life, bro?
I don't know.
Looking at anymore.
Let's check the tape.
What do you do? You run back to the motel, there's another explosion, bro. I thought the cops were supposed to start chasing you. You see this guy coming down the street, what are you doing?
Fucking running the other way, bro.
You can buy weed from him.
This guy, bro, imagine this guy runs up to you and then offers you weed, bro. I don't know what I'll do.
Use trimmers to harvest. Let's go. How many we got?
10. Oh, 8. Okay, we need soil and shit again. Brother, this be long though.
That's why we need more. This is why we need more money, bro. Humble beginning, bro. Use a product manager app. Man, they got apps for everything.
Everything. Elias, see, product managers is a fake job, bro. The app could do your job. What are you doing, bro?
Alright. Don't get searched.
Okay. So what do I do?
Wait, what? Wait, what?
Green crack. Purple sour diesel.
Right, Daddy Purple. Okay. Asking price for 38.
Oh yeah.
List for sale. On the grind, waiting for is that an app for up and coming hustlers, bro?
This is fire, bro.
On the grind.
We already got we already got man hit us up.
Kyle Cooley.
Shout out Kyle.
For 140. That's pretty good.
Was that the same? How much did we offer?
It said 38 per
one.
I guess, I don't know. I just said 38 suggested price. So
I'll take it, bro.
Almost afternoon. Hit him in the afternoon.
Basketball court. Alright, you hooper.
Alright.
I gotta get there now though. Okay, fuck. What's the best? Is that him?
No, but these are potential cons. We have free samples to give now.
Yeah, okay, where's the basketball court though?
Right there.
Yeah. It's right there. We're right next to it.
Just walk around with the water can and shit. You know how it goes.
This way, right?
Maybe we open this game.
Maybe. We just opened the last game.
I don't know about we, bro. I was doing a whole lot of nothing.
Focus. Not too far. Focus. Oh, this guy. It's too far again.
Yo, can you dunk it?
Ah! Yo!
Oh shit.
Yo!
Oh shit. This is actually stat padding now.
Yo! Is that him? Buckets.
Yeah, that's definitely him, bro.
Yeah.
You want 3. Alright, we should probably hit the hardware store before it closes.
The soil on sure.
And put some customers on the way. This guy?
It's not my boy.
Oh, I guess not. He's
Ludwig.
Ludwig, bro.
Shout out Ludwig, bro. Arrange.
Is that a penis?
It's a person, bro. That's a person.
Toad?
Toad. Togepi. That's a customer.
This guy's a cook, bro. This guy, line cook? Yeah, for sure, bro.
My buddy.
Oh my god, the downtown region must be unlocked.
I mean, you got someone that's on the easy.
And Thompson, counter offer, hit him with that 38, bro. Asking price. Oh. Right now. It's right now, bro.
Where's the barbershop? 4 hours? 3 hours? Bro, how quickly does this shit move? Where's the barbershop, bro?
Right there. Right across the street, literally.
What's the potential?
That's the barbershop to the left. Potential customer? Watch out for the boy down.
Alright.
No. Watch the boy. I think it tells you who the potential customer is on the left, right?
Peter.
Alright, just tell this guy real quick.
Donna. Is this my boy?
Yeah. That looks shady as hell.
This one.
Yeah, we upcharged him, bro. Sucker.
Yeah, get in the bread. Let's get hardware store and then let's get more potential customers after stuff. The butter box.
Caffeine Bakery. These guys. I think it's still left.
No, there's police over there.
Yeah, but you're just going hard. Oh, you're not trying to get searched, bro?
Yeah.
I need to put some more money on the card, bro.
Need soil, yeah?
Yeah.
And then what else did I need?
That's it.
I need more fucking thing. Soil.
Oh, you need the seeds.
Right?
Should we hit this guy up?
Yeah. This Hoover, right?
Yeah.
Should I pay off my debt first?
Do we have it? Do we never paid it? Dan's hard. That's not. Wait, this is different. This is different. Should we just get one? Or should we get bulk?
I'll just get one. Okay, where's Dan's hardware?
Map. Oh shit. Somebody looking for 3 guys. What the fuck is Dan's hardware store?
I don't see it.
Alright, I guess we gotta explore a little bit. We get this 3x double 4 time.
Bro, this shit is long, bro.
40 minutes, bro. Oh shit. Time's ticking. We gotta make it to the bar.
Am I going to the Star?
I hope so. No, you're not. You're not going to the Star. That's Taco Ticklers.
The Star's Taco Ticklers?
Yeah.
Then this is above the bar? Are you sure?
Yeah. Oh, under arrest. Behind the dumpster or
You think she was a cop?
No, I think there was just cops in the area, bro. The deal's still open. It's probably 5 hours.
Should I try again?
Yeah, wait for the scene. Yeah, I think the cops are just too close here.
Let's look around. Oh, Dan's Hardware.
Oh shit.
Bro, there's a hardware store right next to us.
Alright, get the Taco Ticklers drop real quick, Dad. Stupid ass cops, they didn't know what they were trying to arrest me. Alright, let's just go back to the hotel before it's nighttime. Oh, you got another text message.
Ooh.
Oh, it was that, okay. It was just a confirmation.
You can pay off your double by placing cash in my stash. It's behind Dan's Hardware. Should I do that now?
Is it close to 9? Home.
Why not? Dan's Hardware is really right there. I don't have 2 OG because how much do I have to pay him though?
I don't know. 60, 30 for 2 seats. Oh my god.
Why is it?
Alright, you gotta go real quick, bro.
Stressing, bro.
You're having too much fun with that. Alright.
Fuck it, let's do this shit.
Yeah. Might need soil.
Does this even have water in it? What's the best?
It's got 10 liters of water in it, bro.
Oh, I'm bugging.
Don't throw it out, don't throw it, just keep it.
Are you sure?
It says just place the soil in the motel. Oh, never mind. Yeah, put them in the trash. Yeah, I guess. Buy a trash bag from the hardware store. You gotta be tweaking, bro.
What's this? I can throw this out?
I think so. I think it's like from the trimmings left over.
Go to sleep.
Go to sleep. And then we gotta buy
trash bag.
Yeah, I think let's go to the hardware store this time. Look, Hank.
Level 2. This is gonna be kind of nasty.
You said don't worry about it.
Oh, I should have. I never replied to him. I lost a potential customer right for that now.
Yeah. Look.
Oh, shit, I need to get baggies too.
You don't have baggies?
I only have 2 left, I think.
Oh, shit. Ah, shit.
I don't understand this part, throwing it in here.
What do you mean? ammo. What you got? Okay. Let's hit the hardware store. You need to try it back. It's full, bro. Jump scared. Jump scared. What does that say?
$800 room.
What the heck? You got the goods, bro. So we need one trash bag, and we need another groton. So we need more dirt. Let's get two. We need another groton.
Should we get a groton?
We need another one. It's on the quest.
Baggies.
Let's just buy more. It's gonna give us like 8 each time. So.
Oh my. Oh.
It's okay to save, right? We got a customer. Damn, you interested in telling your profession?
So, I didn't even read the other ones. Middle of the road. Real trapper, bro. Real trapper. Serious, bro. This music is fantastic. That's it? Garbage waste money. I left my folder open. That's nice. Should I buy this off? Honestly, you're right. Someone texted me.
just doing his text, bro.
I can't reply now. Text your customer. Let's go. This way, right?
Where's that?
Almost home.
Yeah.
Let's go deal with Kyle. Where's Kyle?
That way.
Let's deal with Kyle first. Yeah.
Where's the taco tickles, bro? Alright, so we're gonna have to start getting more strains of shit. Answer the phone, bro. Need some decent cash. You're looking for some real money. You need some more price. More, yeah, come on, man. Okay, so that's the goal. John Martin.
Oh my. Okay, potential customers. 1, 2. So let's go here first. How much? I bear.
Yeah, you need 800 for the crib.
There's a potential customer over here this way, yeah? Yeah, just over the bridge.
He was sick, bro.
Right? I feel like I'm learning to be a hustler, bro. Cause I would have never thought about giving free samples. Where did I walk past them?
Was it that guy that you just walked past? You know, it's that guy in the fucking.
I think he's got his drawers out. He shitted himself. Oh no, I don't know. It's tramp stamp. That's definitely not him.
That's not
Geraldine Poon.
What's this guy's name, bro? He's got a fucking frying pan on his head. No, that's Cranky Frank, bro.
Cranky Frank is crazy. Oh, you think they might live there?
I think this guy is gonna hit the fuck you. An insurance claim on that? Oh, you don't, never mind. Let me try it.
Try that.
That's just like that. Geraldine Poon. Alright, you got one more to give.
6 more, bro. What are you on?
6 more what?
That's 6 more of these.
No, that's 6 number on the thing, bro. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Oh, I'm bugging you, right?
We gotta buy some more seats.
Yeah, you're right. Should I hit old boy up? Albert
with the seeds, bro. Albert Hoover.
Not right now. Fuck.
8? Is that even a deal?
It's not even a good deal. Should I don't have anything.
You don't have 8, bro.
Shit. Fuck, what's his name? Albert?
I'm gonna get low. Honestly, you should probably order in bulk at this point.
Fuck yeah.
One more sample to give.
Chloe Bowers.
God, yeah,
why is everyone on here?
Everybody need, yo, I thought there was a whole other fucking whole other gang in here doing this shit, bro.
Where's Chloe though? Chloe should be around here somewhere.
In the house.
This house?
Anyway, I'm in this house. It's like drill music, what is that? More down the street.
In here? Oh yeah.
81%. You're just gonna line up in the building.
That's
with
100%
the cameras.
successful. That is absolutely crazy though.
Very nice. We're making hella progress.
Whoa, okay.
You don't have anything. Bozo. Old man.
My dick, bro. Did you drop off? Is it ready?
I don't think so.
I need this shit.
That shit like triggered, bro.
Literally have
Have
nothing.
your phone? You got text?
Oh yeah, no. Someone probably asked me for some shit.
Damn, bro. Why can't time fly a little bit faster when we need it to?
Should I just try watering?
Watering nothing, bro.
But should I just just leave it like this then?
Yeah, because once you water it, it'll be a full water, then it'll roll maximum, you know?
Can I knock it out?
You gonna sleep, bro? I thought that he was gonna hit the order in 30 minutes, bro.
We'll probably get it in the morning.
Oh, the behind the casino.
Casino?
That's near the hardware store. The first one. I mean, the second one.
Kiva is a female version of a hustler. Kiva is a female version of a hustler. Is it here? Am I going?
Where's the casino? To the right.
That shit does not look like a casino.
Where's the stash?
Yeah, I can just look at this one more time. This?
I guess the rest for the money, we should probably just pay him anyways.
Think so?
270. We're doing math now?
250.
This is the casino, right? No, that's the range. 25 meters.
This is not a casino.
I think it passes to the left. There we go. Now we got 9 seeds. OG Kush on us.
Oh, all my seats high, bro.
Hey, hustling don't come easy, bro.
This shit got me sleepy, fam. What the fuck? It's midnight.
Try to call it?
Nitro at midnight. Let's try this build this shit. Oh.
Alright, you doing all that, bro. I don't know about all that. Alright, plant the seeds and then put the water. Plant the seeds first. Oh.
Are you sure?
Yeah, for sure. You gotta maximize the hydration. Alright, sick.
Is there a place I can keep this here?
Yeah, just keep all that stuff there so you don't get fucking searched, bro. Can you sleep now? Or is it too early?
No, it's too early.
Because we're doing cleanup.
Fuck, what do we do now? I'm gonna do it, bro. Okay. Bro, shit, my fault. I was already seeing what happened too quickly. Oh my god. How you try? You good? Oh my god. Okay, let's try. I'm just never good at snake.
Snake?
Snake. I'm about to... What do you think the score is to win?
How many pixels are there?
Do the math.
9? Yeah, it's definitely like 100 something, bro.
Easy, I'm already a tenth of the way there. Over a tenth. 14% of the way there. Exhilarating gameplay. Oh, don't do that.
Yeah, it's definitely way more than 100. Who's hitting my line?
Sorry. Don't worry about it. Oh my god, my fault. We lost a customer, bro.
Damn. Sam Thompson. It's Gerald
Think
saying.
he's related to Keenan?
I don't know. Damn, look at our stash, bro. Holy. %.
Kinda, if we can cut these ones, I think we'll have enough money to get the next thing.
Yeah.
We can call it.
Wait.
I want to go to the part where we can start creating our own shit, bro.
What do you mean, like your own strings and shit?
You don't know?
Like you make your own strings and stuff?
You know how, I want to do that.
There's nothing on the dealer right now.
No,
Oh, you mean like the methamphetamine and stuff?
Broski, yeah. We can create some crazy shit, bro.
Drug combinations?
Brother, I seen a clip. Nigga mixed Viagra with some next shit. It's called OG Daddy Death or some shit. Should we make false promises? That's $35 you count that.
What, 40?
Yeah. This is nighttime, bro.
From the motel? Oh, bless, bro. That's right here. Alright, what's our percentage now?
We can false promise.
No, we got it. It's only 2 p.m., bro.
You need water? You think water will make it go faster?
I mean, you can water it after we start doing water.
Oh, next thing. What a beer with that.
Yeah, we'll definitely meet the... Oh, Gerald Poon, Tier 8. He wants 8, bro.
Okay, this is the money maker.
This is the money. This guy's gonna get us a fucking hotel.
Oh god,
Tap.
I'm so nervous, bro. 370?
370? We're gonna break curfew? Yeah. Crazy, bro. 2 for 85. That's actually pretty good. Okay, trim. What trim? We get the trim. 85%.
So like, I think I put everything away for the 8. I just have his 8 by themselves. So I'll just save it for him.
Just print that out.
And then whatever else I make, I'm just gonna do like samples and other deals that happens. Yeah. So two samples. Yeah, we just need 2 more customers and then fuck. I guess yeah, that's it.
Then we get 10 customers.
I mean, maybe I should.
You probably could have done it at the same time, but
I don't know, bro. Sure.
397, bro.
I'm amped. Got a second win.
4 hours for to do these 2 people.
Yeah, I don't overestimate
your feet right and shit.
Yeah.
Think about this though. Spend that whole 800. You gotta make sure that you have one for.
That's a bag mission, bro.
Yo,
what's poppin'?
What happens if you put more than one in one bag?
Okay.
Oh, what does right click mean? It says drag multiple. Maybe not. Guess not.
Not there yet.
One day. Cause so it's a whole 8th in one bag, bro. Come on. Pull up this door wide open and shit. Is the guy? You want to? Oh, he almost got arrested.
Yeah, that shit was crazy.
What's bar? Is this a dead end? Yeah. Some parkour. Do some parkour.
I'm not that like that, yeah.
Escaping agents didn't prepare you for the parkour.
Nah.
So you're trying to get me arrested every time it's set up, bro.
She just acted like nothing. Oh my god. What?
We're taking the whole stack. Alright, so. Potential customers? Quick. Just hold the weed out in public. Who said that? Who said 3?
3 OG for 130? Yeah, you got that. But if I do 3, I'm gonna not have enough for the 8th.
You don't have enough baggies.
Oh, yeah, let me get baggies.
4 closes. Just get those like now. Let's buy some baggies. Oh, speed grow? Oh, he just left the building. Make sure you accept the counter offer before it goes away, bro.
Yes. Knife?
Yeah, I guess. You just gotta bag it real quick. Okay. That's actually stressful now, bro. What the hell? So you gotta do this one now?
Okay, well,
Police curfew started
no.
I started soon.
Where is it?
Pizza place. Sauerkraut Supreme Pizzeria. Oh shit. Oh no, it's not this one. It's the other one. It's the other one. Right there, that guy. That one. The other one's in like 4 hours or 2 hours. Yeah, those 3.
Oh, fucking. So the other one hasn't started yet?
No, it starts in 2 hours.
Why did I do this?
Just run home, bro. Or hide in the dumpster the whole time. But he's gonna be ready, like, where the shooter is. Almost at 800 though. This guy will get definitely. He's gonna give us four bills, bro.
Yeah, we're good. And we can buy it and then we good for the night.
1 hours. Fucking police curfew, bro.
It's fucking crazy, bro.
You guys are relentless. Jesse Waters. We don't got that, bro. This Gerald Poon guy really coming through, bro.
Yes.
He's a big buyer.
Is there a time on here? 10:57.
Yeah, it's also.
Last wish to call it a night.
And we need to re-up, bro, in a new spot, so I guess. I don't know.
I don't know, yo. I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna try to. I'm gonna see if I have the specs to run this game.
I feel like it shouldn't be that difficult.
I feel like.
What was that?
I don't know, bro. You know what it is. I think that
the gang war, bro.
Not gang war, though. Curfew serious, bro.
It's the sun downtown, bro. That's Nixon, bro.
Oh, Nixon.
Blowing loads under euphemisms.
That's what the name is.
Alright, 4 minutes. You probably make it. You probably leave now. Let's go. Geraldine Poon.
Is that Minecraft? Sleep? Save?
Yeah, let's go. Look at that. Look at that. New messages? No?
No. Buy the spot right here, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Sick. Should we just up the
Do we have to
stairs?
pay rent or anything? Or is it like a one-time?
There's one something.
Man, in Nixon's economy, bro. Shit, alright, I think we gotta move our stuff now. Yeah, man, we get like easier access to
Get one more. Peter File down the mountain.
Wait, his name's what?
Peter File.
His name's what?
Peter File, bro. I need Peter File here, bro. Peter.
Bro's about to get real frisky on that.
Peter File is crazy. Peter File is crazy.
How do we pick all this stuff up? There you go.
No. trash? Nah, fuck this. Not that serious. Better ways to make money nowadays.
You gotta come back to me. Sell that RV for parts.
Fat Dragon. I mean, bro, there's no price. That shit got torched like a motherfucker, bro.
Jars if you want to put them in different size containers. 5X product for $3.
Instead of a bag?
Oh, we don't have a bed either in our house.
We don't have a bed? Yeah, we do.
We have a bed?
We have a bed.
Okay, I was like, why would we buy that?
So long life.
Soil, 2 plants. That's.
It's not worth the price.
Yeah, it's not worth the price.
It's not worth. Are you the only one that don't got?
Bro, see, that's why the other one's better. Weekly deposit limit. Whoa. They got a limit on our bread making ability.
That's crazy. Big hit.
Capitalism. They actually hate.
That should be enough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how many? Maybe more baggies, right?
Buy some jars instead.
Okay, let's do jars.
We got some baggies. We have like
5 jars?
Yeah, sure. So what's the message was saying? $240 for 5.
That's a good price.
We don't have it yet. We don't have 5 yet. You wanna buy the speed girl? That's up to you, bro.
What time is it right now?
It's 1 right now.
Is that enough time?
I don't know. We have until 12 a.m., so it'd be like a full 12 hours. I don't know.
Fuck, we'll do next
morning. Alright.
For 480? Hell no.
Yeah, alright, chill. Definitely like 200 though. Fair price is 152, by the way.
Okay, what was it? 180 was the usual one?
Yeah. 180 was usual.
Yeah.
So we got 16 hours to grow
35.
7. So we need 1 plant. And then we need 10.
Oh, fuck it, deal. Yeah, we don't need the speed grow then if we're doing tomorrow morning. Where's it? I'm lost.
That's
right there.
Let's line that one up. It's facing the wrong way. Q. Yeah. Alright. Let's go. We need to get our Blake back, bro. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, we gotta get those niggas, bro.
Fucking torched our RV and
for
shit.
For what?
Bro, we still making money out here.
Exactly.
Grind don't stop, bro. Horses don't stop.
They keep going.
Need my boy Geraldine to come through, bro.
That's a real fin right there.
That's the guy who deserves to get it in the yard, bro.
Fuck, I might as well do that.
What? You gotta stop out, bro.
Oh, I gotta throw this shit out. I'm a bucket getter, bro.
No, you're a bucket getter for sure.
Yeah.
Just not with the bags.
Say that again. Oh my god.
Just not with the bags.
Are you serious? How much shit is that?
Alright, 13 hours?
That's how long it's gonna take?
You got it, you got it.
The
trimmer's on lock. You have to stock the thing. Kathy Henderson after 4 Gs.
Okay.
You gotta reply to these people so they don't get pissed at you, bro.
Okay, what should I say?
Just say nah, unless you want to do it, bro.
Bro, 4 for 175. That's a good price.
Check press counter offer and see. Fair price of 152, but
gotta be worth.
Yeah. All right. Just do the morning, bro. Everybody's getting in the morning.
Should I say yes to everyone?
They'll have enough, right?
I don't know. 8, 16, 20.
They'll have enough for now.
How many people have I said? 5, 9, 13, 15?
Yeah, you'll have 24.
16, 20. Okay. Yeah, fuck it.
Everybody getting served in the morning.
Alright.
You got games on your phone?
Let's see.
37%.
This is quick still. Alright, is there a save button here?
Yeah.
Alright, I did this call it here, bro.
I bet.
Fam.